Welcome back to the Davis Academy of Music. In this lesson, I want to talk to you about chord progressions. Well, now that we've talked about chords and we can use all of our triads and all of our plugins or our extensions of the 7ths, 9ths, 11ths, and 13s, I want to talk to you about chord progressions. Well, chord progression is simply when you take a bunch of chords and you put them together. Now, oftentimes, if you just take random chords and put them together, they're not going to look great. So what do we want to do? Well, we can take specific chords and put them together to make our harmony sound like it's actually moving forward. Oftentimes, if we have chords that are too similar, like a 1 chord and a 3 chord, or a 3 chord and a 5 chord, that doesn't promote a really good harmony. So how do we know what a good chord progression is? Well, it's been said before, and I'll say it again, that most pop songs use 3 chords. They use the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. Now, of course, the 1 is the Roman numeral 1, which means you're tonic. So if you're in C major, you're talking about the C chord. Your 4 chord then in that key would be the F chord, and then your G chord would be the 5 chord. Now, these 3 chords are used over and over and over again, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with using those chords because so many composers and songwriters have noticed this is a really effective way to make a chord progression. So just like when we're talking about intervals and intervals that are closer together are going to be more dissonant, chord progressions, when chords are close together, that actually isn't going to make them more dissonant. In fact, if you have chord progressions that are closer together, that means they're not going to share the same harmonies, so you're going to feel the harmonies pushing forward. Whereas if you have chords that share the same notes, like a C major chord and an E minor chord, since they share 2 out of the 3 notes, it's not going to sound like your harmony is moving anywhere. So you want to figure out a chord progression by looking at how you're going to move the harmony forward and not just have a static harmony. I love using this chart when I'm trying to find a really good chord progression because it's laid out really nice and clear to see. So one of the things you can do is download this chart from our website at www.thedavisacademyofmusic.com. In our store, you can find these charts. And what I like to do is, in every key, start with 1 and then figure out where we're going to go from 1. Now, the way these charts work for our chord progressions is we can go from 1, we follow this arrow, we can go from 1 to anywhere. So from 1, we can go all the way to our 3 chord, or we can go anywhere else. Now, if we go to our minor 3 chord, again, it's not going to be the greatest progression because, again, it shares 2 out of the 3 notes, but just for the sake of this demonstration, let's go to our 3 chord. Now, from our 3 chord, we want to follow our arrow. So there's 2 possibilities. We can go from 3 to 6, or we can go from our 3 chord to our 4 chord. Let's just imagine that we're going to take our 3 and go all the way to our 4 chord. Now this 4 chord here is our 3rd chord in the progression. So far we have our 1 chord, which is C major, our 3 chord, which is E minor, and then our 4 chord, which is going to be F major. Now, of course, we do the same thing. We can pass through and we can use either this 7 diminished chord, or we can go up and substitute the 4 with a 2 chord, which means then we can go back to the 3 chord, or we can go up to the 5 chord. And I think the best route for us is going to be going to the 5 chord. So I'm going to take my 4 chord and traverse up to the 5 chord. So I'll draw my arrow up this way. And then, of course, our 5 chord is going to lead us back to tonic or back to 1. So the goal is when you start on 1, the goal is always to get back to 1. And you can go in some sort of a long-winded or circuitous route and making a really long chord progression, like this chord progression down here as an example, 1 to the 4, to the 7 diminished, to the 3, to the 6, to the 2, to the 5, to the 1. Or you can do a shorter progression like 1, 4, 5, which is one of the most common ones. Or like our progression, we went from the 1 to the 3, to the 4, to the 5, to the 1. So it's basically the 1, 4, 5, but we added a minor 3 in. Now, any of these progressions are going to be good progressions to try. And of course, you can do this in any key. So you don't have to just do this in C major. You can do this in A minor. You can do this in F sharp major, A flat major. Any key can use these same Roman numerals and get you a really good progression. Now, if you have a chord progression that you're using, oftentimes you want to repeat that and loop it over and over and over again, because you don't have to think of a different chord for every measure. Some of my newer composition students will do that. They'll take one chord and they'll go from one chord to a 3 chord, then to a 4 chord, then a 5, then a 7, and they'll use all of the chords, and it just kind of gets a little bit too convoluted and too complex. But my recommendation to you is, once you pick your chord progression of maybe 3 to 4 chords, use that in a loop. So do that over and over and over again. Now, that may sound boring to you when you're starting, but it'll help you keep track of the chords, and it'll help you write a nice, clear piece of music. On top of that, you can, if you get bored, you can invert some of the chords so that you don't have to have them all in root position. You can take them up or down an octave, or you can use them in different instruments. So maybe if the first time one instrument takes the chords, and then the next time a different instrument takes the chords, and you can kind of orchestrate it and arrange it in a way that makes it interesting. In fact, some pieces only use 2 chords or even 1 chord. Now, oftentimes if you just use a 1 chord, it's not going to be a chord progression, because you need multiple chords in order to have a progression. But typically if you have 7, 8, or 10 chords, it's going to be a little bit too complex to start out with. So try to start with your chord progressions of only having 3 or 4 chords, and then go from there. If you need more chords, add the chords. If you don't need them, then just stick with the 3 to the 4 chords that you need. Try this in different keys and see what's comfortable for you. Most composers have maybe 3 or 4 different chord progressions they'll use in a song. And like I said before, 95% of pop songs use 3 chords, the 1, the 4, and the 5. So you don't have to really reinvent the wheel now that you know the secret to writing a famous pop song. Well, have fun with this. Use your guitar, use your keyboard, use any instrument to play these chords. Try all the different chord progressions and try to save the ones that you like the best. Enjoy doing this, and let me know if you have any questions.